Hey everyone, welcome back to Impossible Color. For this week's episode, I'm going to focus on another quick tip for a common problem that I'm sure you've all experienced before. And that is trying to take a picture of a skyline or a building up against a really bright sky. So you end up with a really dark foreground and a background that's way too bright, especially if the sun's going down or just coming up. So the way that you might try to deal with this, that I've tried before, is to try to do your exposure for the buildings. But what ends up happening is the background gets totally overexposed. If I turn on the highlight clipping warning and the shadow clipping warning, you can see that the shadow comes through in blue here. It's a little bit too dark, but the major issue here is the sky is way too bright. You might try to deal with that by just turning down the highlights, and you can see the warning goes away. Maybe you want to bring down your whites to get a little bit more detail in there as well. And bring up your shadows and blacks, and you get something that looks reasonably good, but I find that it's still relatively flat and just not enough detail in the sky. So I don't usually do that. Instead, I do the reverse, where I expose for the sky. And I don't worry about the buildings. It looks like they're going to black here, but you can see the clipping warnings. Only a few little spots are actually turning to blue here. So we will be able to reclaim all of this. So if I go to my snapshots, you can see the after that I did. And let's just turn those warnings off. So there's the before and there's the after. Okay, so how did I reclaim all this? Well, nothing was done to a specific area. This is all global changes that I did. Now you're probably wondering, okay, well, why would I change it in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom when I could just use a camera filter or one of many other techniques? Well, the thing with camera filters is you don't have a lot of control. You might have a gradient that just goes from the top to the bottom, and perhaps you have a holder for your filter and you can kind of move it around a little bit, but really you just have a linear effect that will just go from here to wherever you end it. And it doesn't affect the entire image intelligently. And some of you may be familiar with HDR, and that could work out really well for an image like this, but it could be very time consuming, and if you don't know what you're doing, it can look really fake. Another way that you might deal with it is doing bracketing on your camera, but that's a lot of fiddling around with camera settings, and when the sun is going down, that might not be something that you want to deal with. If you want, you could do multiple exposures and then try to hack them together later on, and sometimes I do that. But the method that I'm going to show you is going to make your life a lot easier. So basically all that I did was I took the shadows and pumped those up really high. So the building detail starts to come up. I also pumped up the blacks quite a bit. I don't usually go all the way because it is important to have some strong shadows to sell the time of day that it is. If you go too bright, it can start to look a little bit unrealistic for the time. You probably also want to bring up your whites quite a bit. So I went to, about 50 here. And what happens is, let's say the highlights was left here when you brought up the whites, you get this overexposed bit here. And so you want to counter that by bringing down your highlights. And sometimes it's also a good idea to increase your contrast so you can see the difference there. It's bringing out quite a bit more. For some of these images, I increased the clarity, but in this case, I thought it was a bit too much. It looked kind of heavy-handed, so I just left that at 0. Okay, let's go on to another example. So here is the before. And under my snapshots, I saved an after. So you can see we get to retain a lot of the nice colors of the sky, but we bring back that building. So how was that done? pretty much the same way. Shadows brought way up. In this case, I didn't need to bring the blacks up. There was plenty there. I actually brought them down a little bit to counter that, just to keep these deep shadows inside of the building, which look nice, and keep the darks of the ominous sky. Again, I brought the whites up, and in this case, I didn't have the really strong highlights that were clipping out anywhere. So a little bit in there, and I could bring that down, but I find it actually doesn't look bad. It doesn't look too, overexposed white. And let's do another example. So the before and now the after. And you can see that there's a lot of change that takes place here. It doesn't even look like the same image. And for this particular image, I went a little bit more dramatic, changing the colors and adjusting a lot of different things, which is your creative choice. But again, bringing up the shadows, bringing up the whites, bringing up the blacks, and then bringing down the highlights to counter all of that. In this case, no contrast and no clarity. Now you may be left with an image that you feel needs a little bit more adjustments to the tones, and in that case you could go into your tone curve and you can start playing with some values there, or you can go into point, and you can see that I made some further adjustments here. So you can see these whites were brought down a little bit. They just look a little bit too pinky there. And you can see down here, the darks were adjusted slightly, and the mid-ranges have a gentle slope here. If you want to make some further adjustments to tone, you might want to also go into the luminance, and per color you can adjust the tones. So you can see I'm bringing out these treetops down here with the reds and oranges, and you can see with the yellow, the lights and some of the brighter areas of the sky were brought out with this. And if you want to see the final image that I did for that last one, I ended up with this. Now this is final tweaks using Photoshop and a lot of cloning and touching up little areas. You can see that that's quite a dramatic change from the original that you see right here. Before and final after. I hope you found this trick useful, and you can employ this for buildings and trees or any other object that's quite tall and it's going to have a high contrast with the sky. If you have your own way of dealing with this and you want to share with the community, please add it to the comment section below. And if you want to help support the channel, please click thumbs up, you can share it, and click on the little green subscribe button below. If you got cool ideas for next week's video, I'm always happy to hear them. Let me know, and I'll see you next week.